Thank you, Rob, first of all, for moderating today's session. I've had a 25-year career in financial services. I was very grateful for the success that I had. I really enjoyed my career. And I think in 2006, it was in November, my son Ishan was born. And at the last minute, there was a birthing complication, which led to a severe birthing brain injury for him, Rob. And that sort of changed my life within an instant, because what happened, first of all, was that I realized that no amount of money could reverse his brain damage. And that was a real realization to me that, you know, all this time that I'd spent trying to build up a nice pot of money, actually it was useless because you couldn't reverse a brain injury. And then what happened was I realized that the entire purpose of what I thought my career was suddenly shattered. And I realized that the world of disability is something that I have now entered into. I've learned more about it. I never really understood what disability even meant until Ishan came into my life. And what I realized at that point, Rob, was that I wanted to do something with disability, but I just didn't quite know what. Fast forward a few years, I was lucky enough to work for an ex-dragon called James Khan. And James helped me to understand how to start businesses and really get into the fabric of entrepreneurship. Fast forward a few years again, I met Shane Bradley, who actually is the reason that Kaleidoscope Investments exists, because Shane Bradley, who is a disabled entrepreneur, he helped me to understand that people with disabilities really struggle to raise money for their business ideas. And he said they get charitable offers, they get grants, they get asked to enter competitions, but actually, why is it that investors are so afraid or don't really consider investing in disabled people? And this suddenly made me realize that, you know, with this investment experience that I've got already, and all the entrepreneurship experience I've got, why don't I bring that into the world of disability? And actually, that would help me to then make sure that I'm leveraging my background and my expertise. It helps me to make sure that I'm doing something in the world of disability that I truly love. And it helps to make sure that as far as Shane is concerned, we are fulfilling a need in the marketplace. So Kaleidoscope Investments was born to help disabled people that have great business ideas to actually start their own businesses. And that was how we started. We started back in late 2014. Till today, we have met over 1,000 disabled entrepreneurs. We have started over 30 businesses. We are developing at least a further 100 in our investment pipeline. And we've got some really amazing experience with regards to understanding disabled people and their different skills and kind of areas that they can focus on. The other thing that I learned, Rob, was the size of the disability market. You know, at 1.3 billion people worldwide and over 14 million people in the UK alone with disabilities, this was a very significant market that a lot of people hadn't understood. And our mission was really all about helping people with disabilities, number one, find purpose, okay? Because this is the number one challenge that I have been explained to is the lack of purpose that they've been able to find through the lack of genuine opportunities that they've been able to have. You know, they really face a lot of judgment and unfair, you know, unconscious bias towards them. And we wanted to try and sort of help to, you know, move that aside. So Kaleidoscope is very much all about looking at the individual and their idea, seeing past the disability and not worrying about what they can or can't do, making sure that their support is in place to help them. So, you know, Kaleidoscope Investment is very much about that. Our mission is really about trying to change negative perceptions, you know, and we want to do that through creating role models that then inspire other people. And, you know, our goals are to expand Kaleidoscope internationally. In addition to the entrepreneurship side, Rob, we've also got a recruitment arm. So our recruitment arm will help disabled people that are looking for jobs to actually find those jobs and build meaningful careers. And we've also set up a charity called the Kaleidoscope Foundation, which will help disabled people that actually don't have profit as their number one priority. You know, we will help them to sort of build smaller businesses by giving them grants and helping them with skills training, Rob. So that's pretty much how Kaleidoscope was born and what we can offer.
Thanks, Hardeep. That's a fascinating insight into how your own personal experience thrust you into the situation where your experience with your son Ishan, who we can see on the wall behind you, has brought you into this world of disability. And I picked up, you know, one of the driving purposes was fulfilling a need in a market that's not well served. all about developing a solution to fulfill an unmet need in a market. And I want to turn to you, John. Perhaps you can tell us something of your experiences as a serial entrepreneur and how you believe entrepreneurship can play a role in providing that innovation to tough challenges, and particularly such a challenge as creating greater inclusion. And why, you know, especially as we sit now having experienced the last 3 months with the world on lockdown, people in uncommon circumstances, how can entrepreneurship be a solution to get out of an economic crisis?
That's a great platform. It's a great question. Thanks, Rob. It's very quickly, a little bit about me for those who don't know. My background is all about food. The first 30 years of the last 35 years of my professional life, I set up 3 businesses: New Covent Garden Soup Company in 1987, Glencoe Foods, which was very similar to soup in the UK, but it was based in California, and then Little Dish, which is all about healthy, convenient, tasty meals for kids in 2005. And we sold those businesses, and now I help a lot of early stage startup businesses, either as an investor or as an advisor, and I'm on the investment committee for Kaleidoscope Investments. And back to your question, I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot to be said about entrepreneurship, and a lot to be said about how entrepreneurship, in my view at least, levels the playing field where it comes to disadvantaged communities, and particularly to disabled people. Entrepreneurship, in my view at least, is blind to disability, and that's one of the great things about it. I think a lot of time, unfortunately, it's the case when somebody sees a disabled person, they only see the disability, and that gets in the way of a lot of the value that a disabled person can offer the world, the mind business world. I think entrepreneurship therefore encourages others to see the value that disabled people can bring, and disabled people make really good entrepreneurs, because frankly, entrepreneurship is it's all about dealing with adversity. You know, we're as entrepreneurs, we're trying to be different. We're doing things differently that we haven't done before, certainly not the same way. We're being disruptive. We're uprooting trees, or we're crashing through walls. We're doing all those wonderful things. But actually, you know, a disabled person is very well conditioned and very well prepared for that kind of life, because they've had to deal with all those sort of roadblocks and obstacles all the way through from whatever the disability occurred or from birth. So they're really well conditioned, really well prepared to be a really strong, really good entrepreneur and roll with the punches. And of course, if it's a disabled market, even better. You know, they've got a great insight into the consumer base, into the need that the business needs to fulfill. And the second part of your question, in terms of, you know, where we are right now, and then you know, this economic crisis that we're going through. As far as I'm concerned, any crisis, it's all about uncertainty, and uncertainty is a kind of a breeding ground for entrepreneurs to perform, because entrepreneurs are good at turning uncertainty into a competitive advantage. And that, you know, if there's any time that defines us now in terms of uncertainty, it's all around us. We're living through extremely uncertain times. We're all so used to saying this, but this really is true in this particular case, and it's not just here in the UK, or it's not just European, or it's not just an industry, it's global, and it affects all of us. So I think entrepreneurs, you know, they find opportunities in times like these. And I think, you know, when customers are changing their preferences and changing the way they work and changing how they live their lives and changing how they purchase things, I think the smart entrepreneurs are the ones who are going to be figuring out how to meet this new need as it begins to be defined the back end of this year, because we're still going through a huge degree of flux. So for all those reasons, I think it's a great time for entrepreneurs, and I think it's a fantastic time for disabled entrepreneurs, and that's one of the major reasons that I'm involved in Kaleidoscope, in the context that I can contribute my time.
John, thank you for that wonderful insight. I think it's really interesting, picking up on one of the points that you made about leveling the playing field right at the start of what you were saying there. And Hardeep mentioned the issue of subconscious bias. I want to bring in Zenobia, and I've been remiss, I should also mention to all of our attendees today that there are opportunities by you using the Q&A panel for you to ask your own questions, which we'll come on to a little later. But Zenobia, talking about this leveling the playing field and unconscious bias, whilst COVID-19 and the changing circumstances do present fantastic opportunities for entrepreneurs to break molds and do something new, this unconscious bias is a persistent stain on society, a stain on disabled people, that they don't seem to get the same opportunities, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in attracting investment. Can you perhaps talk to us about why you think that is, and also how you think that COVID-19 will create better opportunity for the situation that people with disability find themselves in to be seen in a more positive light?
Sure. Thank you, Rob. Hello, everybody. I'm Zenobia Nadirshaw, have worked in the National Service in the field of disability for nearly 44 years. And so I feel very privileged to be here answering the kind of questions that Rob has set to me about. Folks, unconscious bias is an incredible, universal kind of phenomenon, which all of us, including the panel over here and all the other subjects of society, have been dealing with. Unconscious bias is all about bias that starts from an early childhood situation where your family or your caretakers or whoever have made certain statements about disability, that disability is such and such, it is weakness, it is this, it is that. There is unconscious bias toward the use of people of color, from people from other ethnic backgrounds, that they are mad, bad, and dangerous, etc., etc. And I have worked in the NHS over a long period of time to challenge these assumptions. And for my reputation, I have been given a wee bit of awards regarding the fact that I have dealt with these issues of unconscious bias. We need to be looking at this whole concept of unconscious bias in relation to what I call right now the resilience that is around within our disabled community. And I'm very hesitant in using the word disabled all the time, because for me, ability comes first, number one, rather than disability. And so I've seen over my career and my clinical experience about the kind of abilities that our disabled people have, and how, because of lack of opportunities and lack of equality principles, they are marginalized against the normal society. So I am very keen that our disabled community be offered and have the confidence to do the kind of projects that they're doing, to receive the kind of support that they are receiving from their family and carers and our organization as we have. And they have shown such adaptability to the changing circumstances that we are right now perceiving and what they are experiencing. So I am very, very concerned and want to make a clear statement that our disabled or abled community also have a purpose in life, and we as KI will be there behind them to support them because of the kind of products that they're achieving, the projects that they have and ideas they have in mind, as long as we have done a risk assessment about these issues. Yes, so we have, from the governance perspectives, a lot of responsibility to ensure that we will look to these people subject to a risk assessment and risk management strategy that we will be putting in based on their permission, etc. That's me.
Thank you. Thank you, Zenobia. I think you've raised some really interesting points about seeing ability rather than disability. And I think that, you know, for non-disabled people, having had to spend weeks at a time stuck at home, working in scenarios where perhaps their workspace hasn't been ergonomically set up like they would expect in the workplace. That sensation of potentially being trapped in the home, they are getting a little bit of a window into, in some ways, perhaps the world that people with disability of a certain height may experience. We're also seeing changes to the context. I mean, only yesterday the UK government announced that ride-on e-scooters will be permitted, hired e-scooters, and immediately the Royal National Institution for the Blind expressed its concern about the ability of visually impaired and blind people to safely navigate around with e-scooters coming at them quietly and fast from all sides. I want to bring in Feargus here. I mean, I think it's pertinent, Feargus. You do suffer from visual impairment, and you have achieved, you've shown ability in spades and have achieved far more than many other people throughout your career. I want you to tell us a bit about what you have done to get to where you've got to today, and what led you to founding your business, Define, and how does your disability serve you as an asset in terms of shaping the way that you want to shape and grow your business?
Okay, thank you, Rob. Hopefully you can all hear me fine. Yes, no problem. So first off, Zenobia, I always love listening to you because I think the focus on ability and unconscious bias is actually, it's a very, very important area for people to look at. My general experience has always been that when people are dealing with people with disability, especially in the workplace as well, you find that they either don't want to touch it and they try to treat you as though you are completely equal and able to everybody else, and they evaluate you on those norms, or they totally underutilize you or over patronize you. So I think it's actually really, really important to look at those areas, so thank you for pointing those out, From my perspective then, a very brief kind of walk through my background. I have a BA in history from Trinity College in Dublin. Then I went on and I did a graduate diploma in computer science and worked at Microsoft for several years. As my sight then deteriorated, I kind of had to leave that profession because the technology just didn't really exist at the time to serve my needs. And I went on to do a law degree at King's College. My wife had to read all my books to me and record them. I graduated with a first-class honours degree in the top 10 of my year. And then I went on to do my training contract and work at two major city law firms, two Magic Circle law firms. Interestingly enough then, as though that wasn't enough, you always find that you have to overcome some other issue. And it was while working at the law firms that I realized actually, there was a further disadvantage being blind in the legal profession. And one of those disadvantages was the fact that when you're going through major legal contracts, I'm not sure how many people in the audience have experience of reading major legal contracts, but one of the things you will notice is actually when you're reading those contracts, either at the beginning or at the end, what you have is a massive kind of list of A to Z terms that are all defined and given a specific meaning. And then throughout the rest of the actual document, you'll see those words referred to. And classically, what you have to do is you actually, in order to understand the provision that you're reading, you have to go back and look up the meaning of that actual word so that you can actually understand properly the legal context is. Now, traditionally, the way most solicitors, attorneys do that is they have four methods. They either print out a hard copy, they'll do a Control F, they'll scroll up through the document, or they'll have a split screen where they're looking at the defined terms beside them. But either way, it's still time consuming. And for somebody who's visually impaired like myself, it actually cost me a huge amount of efficiency and time just to try to access the information itself that was already contained in a document. It was just a case of having to find it. And then in one of the companies that I was working at is where I met my colleague Namdi, and he was like fully abled, and he was just fascinated to kind of understand, like, how does this blind guy actually do his work, you know? And he kept asking questions and asking questions. How do I do this? And I'd show him how I do it, etc. And then one day he just asked me, you know, well, if you had a dream solution, what would it be like? And we kind of put our heads together and we said, well, ideally, what I would love to be able to do is just highlight one of those words that has a meaning, and without having to look anywhere throughout the document, just have that appear on the screen beside me. So I don't have to scroll, I don't have to control, I don't have to lose the context of what I'm reading, and I can just see the meanings of these words as they appear. And with that in mind, then Nnamdi and I just kind of, you know, realized, well, Nnamdi actually is the one who realized the actual global application for it, because he was like, God, you know, Feargus, actually, that's something that would actually be really helpful to me too, you know? And so what we actually very, very quickly discovered was this was something that was a pain for lawyers everywhere, you know? And really what happened is actually we, you know, what became one man's problem really was everyone's solution in the legal field. So we developed a prototype, and now, you know, we have some contracts going, we're up and running. So that was really how somebody with a disability was able to identify a problem and not only create a solution for themselves, but a solution that would make life easier for everybody in the sector. And that kind of brings me on, Rob, to your kind of final point about, you know, the strengths that somebody with a disability can bring as an asset, you know. And it kind of touches back a little bit on what John was saying about adversity too. You know, what you realize, like as you grow older and maybe more mature, and you look at the world around you, is that, you know, the world that we live in is generally built on the average. You know, it's to accommodate the average person with the average ability, the average height, the average everything. You know, and once you fall outside that kind of norm, what you very quickly realize is that you have to adapt around the average. In other words, you have to make the average exceptional in order to be able to, for it to work for you, you know? And I think that's where a lot of the people with disability have strengths. Like every day of their life, for many of them, they are looking for solutions so that they can just live a day-to-day independent, full, purposeful life, you know? And I think that's really where it is. You know, you're constantly faced with that adversity. So I think for me, the asset is ultimately that where like a lot of people might perceive a weakness, I oftentimes perceived a strength in that weakness. So, you know, there's many companies that I could walk into. If I spent 6 months in that company working there, I could probably point out workflows and practices that, because they don't work for me, they're not just inefficient for me, but oftentimes I found that when you point out that inefficiency, then it actually also seems to benefit everybody else around you, because somehow or another, when you can accommodate that, it somehow seems to work for everybody else. So I'd say, you know, one of those great strengths is actually the disability itself. You know, the idea that people who have disability are natural problem solvers, because that's innate in living with a disability. And I think that's what they bring to the table of entrepreneurship. I think they just have a unique perspective on finding solutions. And I think given the opportunity to find those given the opportunity and the backing to find those solutions, I think you not just make the disabled person's world a lot easier, but I think you'll actually make the world generally much more comfortable for people, you know? So that's really it, Rob.
Thank you, Feargus. That is absolutely fascinating, both your personal journey and your insights as an entrepreneur, and how you've come to the solution that Define is offering as a business solution. John, I want to bring you back in as a serial entrepreneur. Feargus has highlighted entrepreneurship is all about providing solutions, and why, as a disabled person, you know, he has found a solution that he had to find for his own professional day-to-day life, and just getting through day-to-day life with a disability is about finding solutions to problems. He also talked about, developing the resilience and the teamwork of working with other people to understand how what's a problem for him may be not a problem for other people, but actually creates a positive solution. I want to ask you, having been a serial entrepreneur, now turned investor, mentor, and advisor, what are the key things that you look for as the merits of a business? And where do you see the opportunities for that, particularly focusing in the disability sector? Do you look at a business in the disability sector because it's in the sector, or do you look at things purely on economic merits?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked quite a bit, because I don't have a disability myself, and I don't have an obvious link to a disability. So people will ask me, why do I get involved in this? And partly it's that leveling out the playing field, and I guess I have an innate willingness, I guess, to support the underdog, I suppose, in some way, shape, or form. And I suppose there's lots of history which drives that motivation. But in terms of your question, yeah, I mean, I look at businesses. I don't look at different types of businesses. I certainly don't look at businesses that are run by disabled entrepreneurs purposefully. Through Kaleidoscope Investments, I get to see a lot, but I get to see a lot of businesses anyway. So I don't seek them out. Although I mentioned earlier why there are certainly, and I recognize there's so many advantages to dealing with disabled entrepreneurs. So what I do is I look at businesses, full stop, and merit them on the basis of probably, well, there's a whole range of different issues, of course, there always is, and there's no one size fits all, and no two businesses are exactly the same. But ultimately, given the number of businesses that I've looked at in the last 10 years, 5 years even, there's kind of two, maybe three things that jump out at me. And number one is it's the product. Kind of an obvious statement, but actually, why is it obvious? That it's not just the product exists and the product, does something for somebody. Usually it does something for the entrepreneur. Usually what happens is an entrepreneur is so fed up that they can't find something. They think, if only this, why doesn't this exist? What I need is this. And then they say, okay, I can't find it anywhere. And what I'm going to do is just do it myself. I'll give up my job and make it myself. And they do, and they launch it. But the issue is that the product has to meet a consumer need. The bigger the need, the better, and the bigger the group of the consumers, the better, right? But it's got to meet a need. It doesn't really matter how big that need is, so long as it does absolutely hit the nail on the head. So it's got to really meet a consumer need. And the brand has to, if it's a brand product, that's my world as FMCG and food, is actually communicate that need to the consumer. So it has to do what it says on the tin, frankly, is the way to summarize it. And if it doesn't, you don't have a business, because you're constantly going to be struggling, pushing water uphill to make it work when it won't work. So number one, the product. Number two is the entrepreneur. It's as simple as that. It's the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur has to be smart and resilient, and we talked about all those issues before. We talked about all those sort of historical, hereditary conditioning issues that make disabled entrepreneurs so good at being entrepreneurs, because they're conditioned to fight adversity. They're conditioned to find solutions, just living a purposeful life, like Feargus mentioned. But the other issue is, will they listen? And it's interesting from an advisory point of view or from an investor point of view. You're trying to add value. Certainly, I try to add value to the business I'm involved with. And it's not that I have all the answers at all, but an entrepreneur really should listen now and again to what the advisor has to say. And if they don't agree, by all means, push back and give a justification why you want to do something else. That is perfect. In fact, I love that, because the entrepreneur will know their business better and know their target audience better than I will. But really, if the product is strong and the entrepreneur is strong, everything else could be wrong, and you could probably fix it somehow. But those two things really have to be assets. And maybe you could add the third bit in, which is a commercially strong idea or commercially scalable opportunity. So there are enough people out there to whom you can sell your product or your service. So it's commercially scalable, and you can do it at the right price, the cost, and you can charge the right sort of price. Those sort of commercials got to work. Often, though, if they don't work at the beginning, you can make them work towards the end with scale and with working on the business. But really, ultimately, the product and the entrepreneur. So what I look for is good products supported by good entrepreneurs, irrespective of whether the entrepreneur is disabled or not. Although, as I mentioned, there's lots of reasons why disabled entrepreneurs make great entrepreneurs. and irrespective of whether the market is a disabled marketer.
Thank you, John. That's really good insight into the three sort of key characteristics you look for. And I think it's apt that you've brought up products, because I want to bring in Sheana now. Sheana, you're not a disabled entrepreneur, but you are an entrepreneur with a product background who has decided to focus on the disability sector. We had some insight from Hardeep at the top of the webinar that this is a sector with 1.3 billion people worldwide, directly affected by some kind of disability. And to give some context to that statistic, that includes everyone, over sort of the age of getting into what medicine would categorize as geriatric, who may have a disability that is struggling to get upstairs and not an acute disability, as well as everyone with the unseen disabilities, so the area that Zenobia focuses on with mental disability, where there are a great proportion of people who are disabled who have no physical appearance that is different to any other person walking down the street, but they struggle with some element. Tell us a bit about what you've done, Sheana, with AERGO, how you got to where you've got to, and how product was the driver in that, and why have you chosen to focus on this particular segment?
So a little bit about my background. I was a product designer and then mechanical engineering by training in my postgraduate. So I've been creating a lot of products, electronics or consumer goods that I feel like end up in the landfills eventually and doesn't really serve a good purpose. And that's where I really reevaluated kind of the time I'm spending on developing products. I really want it to have an impact in terms of improving people's life, because that would give me a lot more meaning and drive to get me out of bed in the morning. And so when I first started to become engaged in the disability sector was my work with special needs schools, where I was working with a lot of children who were born with muscle wasting conditions and looking at the equipment they had in terms of they're all clinically excellent, but then they're not as usable in terms of children by nature, despite of their abilities or disabilities. They love to move. And I've seen how they've been strapped down in their wheelchairs just to maintain an upright posture so that they can breathe better, that they can communicate, that they will not be discriminated against. A lot of children who suffer from slumping in their chair just because they don't have the muscle tone to sit upright, they face a lot of discrimination and really deters them from being part of the society as they grow older and get a job. It's just not fair in my opinion. So as a product focused person in the beginning, I basically developed this technology with the children and the clinicians, where we use a network of pressure sensitive air cells that continuously monitor their sitting position and automatic correct posture in real time. It's very discreet, so you don't have to be manhandled, and it kind of just integrates in your seat quite elegantly so that it doesn't shout disability. So just kind of bring the design element back to the product, and through Zenobia's conversation and Feargus's earlier comments about inclusive designs, how can we make product much more inclusive so that it can benefit a wider public as well, because when you design for these extreme users, actually everyone benefits, and it's the best win-win situation for any product development. So that's really how AERGO was founded, with this first seating system that's truly responsive to people's seating needs, and the core technology is also not limited to people on a wheelchair. It can also benefit everyone who's sitting in an office chair who suffers from lower back pain. So in that sense, it becomes a much more universal platform technology.
Thank you, Sheana. That's fascinating to hear about how you've created a product. You've thought sensitively about the issues that disabled people have, and I remember from last week's discussion as we were preparing for this webinar that actually it's fascinating hearing the interplay between you and Feargus as two entrepreneurs, and Feargus was sharing, actually I think there's some great feedback and insight that I can give you, because people with visual impairment often find themselves unconsciously stooping their necks, getting neck issues as they're looking down to try and read documentation. both of your businesses have evolved out of identifying a product market fit, identifying a need in a market. But early stage investing, by its very nature, is inherently risky. Perhaps we can bring John back in a minute on this, but Zenobia, I want to ask you, you've spent your career in the realm of academia, which is by its very nature all about the fine detail, about making sure that everything that you put into your academic argument is referenced, cross-referenced, and is academically sound. The same is true of the way that Kaleidoscope is going to seek to approach investing in businesses. Perhaps you can talk us through some of the building blocks that you think will need to be integrated into the risk management process to look at early stage businesses with the diverse audience of participants that we've got across the Kaleidoscope group.
Thank you, Rob. Number one, we start with the premise that all humans have got the potential to develop, irrespective of their handicap or disability. Because my starting point, and I believe KI's starting point, is the fact that we are looking for and hearing about abilities of our people, the kind of projects that they come through. We need to make an assessment of the kind of risk that project poses in terms of its fulfillment of the project, etc. In terms of the kind of difficulties, right from the start, we do some very appropriate risk assessment and risk management. And we are offering a lot of training in this area across the board, these topics, because, life is one big risk. We all have risks. It's a question of what is our capability in terms of working through those risks and managing those risks. Who are the people we can seek support from to manage our risks? That is what I believe KI will be in a very strong position via the governance to be looking at these projects.
Zenobia, thank you.
Rob?
I want to bring Hardeep in here. Hardeep, Kaleidoscope has a mission to create opportunity for the earlier stage entrepreneurs, but it also wants to build a business that follows on and develops economic return for investors by creating very successful companies from the earlier stages. Perhaps you can give us some insight into the range of companies that you've seen over the last 5 years of observing, meeting and mentoring startup founders in the disability space. And also perhaps you can give us some insight that develops upon this 1.3 billion person market and tell us about which are the standout winners that you've identified from the sector that prove that this really is a huge addressable market.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, so the first thing I want to say, by the way, Feargus and Sheana, I'm so proud of both of you and what you said today. And I think you are the example. You are both examples of why we do what we do. So thank you so much for sharing what you did. So what I want to say, Rob, first of all, is that my single biggest lesson learned in having met over 1,000 disabled people from 63 different disabilities across 26 countries. Okay, so that's 1,000 people, 63 disabilities across 26 countries, is that you must never judge a book by its cover. And as obvious as that sounds, that is the single biggest mistake that most people do. And even as a parent of a disabled child, I face discrimination. So, this unfair judgment is really critical. And that's one of the things that we really have to change. The other thing, Rob, in terms of the size of the actual market, we talk about 1.3 billion, but from an entrepreneur and investor point of view, thinking about the size of the spending power, there is $8 trillion per year that people with disabilities and their families have to be able to spend on products and services. And in the UK alone, there's $250 billion per year, okay? This is called the purple pound, and this is what families are able to spend of disabled people. And this is something that investors really should think about, because, you know, when you think about the size of the market, there are not enough products to serve the disabled community, full stop. Okay, that's for a starter. But a lot of the people, like Feargus, for example, they've developed products that are for the non-disabled and disabled community. So actually the opportunities are very, very significant. And the other thing, Rob, in terms of, you know, the areas to focus in the sectors, we did some analysis on 500 businesses that approached us recently. So the top 5 are as follows. In the technology space, we got our number 1, 30% of the ideas came from technology. The number 2 was retail, fashion, and clothing. And when I say clothing, I'm talking about adaptive clothing here. The number 3 was education and access to consultancy. So a lot of people wanted to create consultancy businesses that would help disabled people have more access. The number 4 was travel. Now, travel for people with disabilities is absolutely huge. And here I would bring around an industry example, Rob, called Accommable, where they developed effectively an Airbnb, but for disabled people. You know, so it was disabled friendly, you know, there were no steps, people with wheelchairs could go to it. And it was developed by Srin and Martin, two individuals in wheelchairs. And a few years after they developed it, they were actually bought out by Airbnb. Okay, so this goes to show that there are beginning to be entrepreneurs that are creating products that are being bought by much bigger organizations and companies. And then the 5th and final area was health and sport, and enabling paid people to do more, that are disabled, to do more with sport and health. And that is critical because, you know, there's a lot of people that are developing products where people can start doing exercise from their home environment, and technology is being leveraged to do that. But interestingly, in terms of the weightings, Rob, and profitability from what we've seen, apart from the technology space that's number 1, actually, we're looking at the travel and access as ratings products as being the number 2 most profitable area, followed closely by health and then fashion. And excuse me, I think it was Tommy Hilfiger that created an adaptive clothing line recently where he had $400 billion of market size in that adaptive clothing market alone. And he was the first person to do that. The other point that I wanted to make, Rob, about success stories already is people that we look at every single day, like Henry Ford. You know, we drive Ford cars. The founder of IKEA, Tommy Hilfiger, I mentioned, Richard Branson. These are people that have disabilities. They have dyslexia. And according to the Equality Act 2010, this is a really powerful, you know, this is a really powerful thing for us to realize, because dyslexia or learning disabilities or difficulties are classified as being disabled. So I think that's a really big thing to understand. And COVID-19, one of the things that COVID-19 has brought along is this sort of focus on mental health. So we are focusing on a few apps that are being developed into mental health space now, which are likely to do extremely well, because, you know, mental health now is going to be the next biggest thing for people. Absolutely. When they're going back into the workplace, you know, trying to understand and deal with redundancies or losing their job, you know, and that takes me into sort of the Kaleidoscope recruitment element of it. The other thing with the current climate, Rob, that we've realized is that actually a lot of people with disabilities now are being recognized in ways they weren't being recognized before. You know, as Zenobia alluded to earlier, you know, for a person with a disability living in isolation, for example, might be something that they're more accustomed to, whereas a lot of people more recently that were not disabled really struggled with living in isolation post-COVID-19. And also through the way that we are talking now, the way that we're doing this conference now through Zoom, this means that a lot more people with disabilities that may have struggled with mobility are actually now being able to work through the computer, and they don't have to be physically present. So that means more disabled people are in the job market now, they're looking for jobs, and more companies are looking for disabled people that can bring an alternative perspective to the game. right? So they're looking at different ways that they can start marketing themselves. So actually recruitment and entrepreneurship for disabled people, I think now during COVID and post-COVID is a very big area to focus on. And you can also see this through the Valuable 500 initiative from Caroline Casey, where she's trying to get 500 of the world's top CEOs to bring disability onto the board agenda. So even companies and corporates are now thinking more seriously about how they can hire disabled people. So I think, Rob, those are some of the areas that I would say are the ones to focus on from the opportunity perspective for potential investors.
Hardeep, you've covered a huge amount of ground there in a very short time and given us an insight to the scope of the market opportunity. Something I know that you'd be delighted to talk to anyone after this webinar about, and about what Kaleidoscope's seeking to do across investment, advisory to companies on their corporate social responsibility aims, recruiting, whichever element it is. I want to give an opportunity now to our audience to answer some questions, and we've had a few questions come in through the Q&A tab, and please, if you have any other questions, got a great opportunity with John having given up his time, Zenobia as well, and also with our entrepreneurs to get their insights from working in this marketplace that is rapidly evolving but is underrepresented at this stage. So I think this is a good question to start with, and to put you on the spot, John, as someone who's built a career in consumer goods. Why, and this is a question from Kush, why are there more clothing lines for dogs than there are for disabled people?
And Rob, I meant to know the answer to that. Yeah. Well, let's give it a go. I mean, yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, the British public, or the British and Irish public, the amount of money they spend on their pets is quite incredible. I remember doing some research initially way back before we started Little Dish, and it was all about what size of a market there is for children's food, because that's what Little Dish was. It was a range of originally healthy, convenient, tasty meals for kids, and subsequently snacks. And we're just kind of trying to figure out, we knew there was a market, but how big was the market? And the research that came back was that British households over-index in terms of spending power on their kids. Yeah, not just food, not just clothes, but healthcare and care, attention, and all the rest of it. And in terms of the amount of decisions that are made with kids in mind, which are affecting the rest of the family. But even more so were pets. It wasn't just the kids, it was the pets actually were number one in terms of what sort of influences on household budgets and spending do pets have. So in other words, influences outside of the parents. Let's say it's a two-parent family. Their needs are clearly there, identified, but what proportion of spending goes on other stuff. And pets had a bigger influence than even kids, which had a huge influence as far as we were concerned. We were delighted with that because we were going to develop a business for kids. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a huge range of products, whether it be fashion aids or clothing for pets. But clearly the priorities are wrong, right? And I think that's what we're here to try to redress that balance. I don't know what the answer is, but I can guarantee you some entrepreneur or some potential entrepreneur out there who is disabled or is fulfilling a need in a disabled market will know. So, we're not here to come up with all the ideas. We're here to facilitate those ideas coming to the fore. We're here to facilitate those ideas being funded, because there's a huge problem with access to funding, as Hardeep mentioned. And we're also here to reduce the risk, because we touched on risk earlier, Rob. In the context of the risk assessment that Zenobia was mentioning, entrepreneurship is all about risk. It's built on risk. Don't get into entrepreneurship if you're not comfortable with risk. And don't invest in a business that's early stage or pre-revenue if you're not comfortable with risk. But what Kaleidoscope is all about, and particularly the mentoring side of it, is all about trying to manage that risk, trying to mitigate those risks, and try to give you an opportunity to get a leg up and get ahead despite those risks. So, that's what I'd say in the context of bringing entrepreneurship and bringing disability together, particularly in the context of fashion for dogs or fashion for animals. I have no idea, but I'd quite proudly admit that.
Rob, can I add to that, if you don't mind? very
Please do.
quickly. Kush, what I would say is there's actually 7 businesses that we're working with right now that are trying to bring to the market adaptive clothing lines. 5 of them are for ladies and 2 of them are for men. And they're focusing on people being in wheelchairs, but one of them is focusing on accessible crutches and things like that. So this is an area, you've hit the nail right on the head, Kush, but there's a lot of people that are aware of it and are beginning to focus on it.
Thank you both for shedding some light on that. And John, sorry for putting you on the spot there, but I'm glad that you were able to stand up to the test. I want to turn to another question from David, addressed to Zenobia, but I also want to bring in Feargus and Sheana on this. And the question is relating to risk assessment and management. Can you comment on the relative risk versus the perceived risk? And specifically also the risk to the disabled person, risk of close proximity to others, risk to their business. What other types of risk are there? And then perhaps Feargus and Sheana, you can just give us a little 30-second snippet on the insight that you've had of the mentorship and the interaction you've had with Kaleidoscope and how that's helped you to consider risks to your business. So Zenobia.
Sure. The kind of risk assessment that we will be doing will be to look at subdomains of different types of risks. Risk to the self, risk to others, risk within the family, risk at a social setting. And the kind of things that we would be looking for would be some very clear or very specific questions that myself will be asking the entrepreneurs, asking are based on personal background, their social background, their ability to vocalize and to be appreciative of the fact that, yes, there are things that are risky here. These are the kind of preventative strategies that they are adopting to prevent the impact of the greater risk. So it's those kind of questions that I will be asking. And based on some of those answers, Rob, I will be advising and assisting the entrepreneur in terms of a risk management strategy that they can employ within their own personal space, as well as the safety of our organization.
Thanks, Zenobia. And Feargus, perhaps you can comment on how your interactions thus far with Kaleidoscope have helped you to consider potential risks, whether it be risks from your disability or risks to your business plan. What insights have you learned thus far?
Sure. Thank you, Rob. So I think like one of the first things I'd say in relation to risk is no matter what amount of mitigation you do, you will never 100% eliminate risk. Yeah. And I think for anybody looking to invest in any company, whether that's a company who has a disabled entrepreneur starter or a fully able starter or an ethnic minority starter, etc., you know, there makes no difference ultimately. There's always going to be risk associated with a startup. Yeah. And one of the things that I had found initially looking for investment, etc., was the fact that the mindset of a lot tends to be they want the golden egg. You know, they want the X exit, and you know they really don't care where that company is sourced from. If they see a company that has a disabled starter, etc., you know, they will look at it if they think there's going to be some kind of 100x, you know. But what we actually found generally, though, was getting companies to look at you in the first place, because the perceived risk is that they don't necessarily believe from the onset that you're capable of an exit simply because of the initial foundation of the startup itself, i.e. they don't necessarily have the faith that, oh, somebody with a disability can make a startup good enough to give them the reward that they want, you know. And that's the hope for our company, to disprove all of that. And in relation to our interactions, I think with Kaleidoscope, I think one of the first and most profound impacts I think that Kaleidoscope had was the the fact that they were prepared to look and give you the opportunity. And I think knowing that people see the potential in what it is that you're doing gives somebody so much encouragement, you know? Like, I remember the times Namdi and I would sit down and going, oh my God, it's amazing that this company is looking at us, because, you know, it just gave us that belief actually in the product. And in relation then to kind of helping us assess our own risk, etc. I think, you know, in terms of looking at the market and trying to determine, you know, how more broadly applicable it could be, I think Kaleidoscope are really invaluable also in kind of reaffirming that position about the utility of the product in the general market, as opposed to just the disabled market or the visually impaired market, and kind of helping us to look at that. So I think that would be kind of the things that I would say. But I do think, you know, it's kind of knocking the myth, I think, of that perceived risk in investing with somebody who's from an ethnic minority or disabled minority. A business is a business, as John said, and it's either a good product or a bad product. And at the end of the day, a good product sells itself, you know?
Thanks, Feargus. And Sheana, I just want to very quickly bring you in, conscious that we're running up to the last minute and a half of our scheduled time, and we may have to overrun slightly. But Sheana, your insight on what risk management you've borne out of the process thus far from Kaleidoscope.
Oh, so I think, well, one of the great thing about working with Kaleidoscope is that there's so much empathy in terms of bringing in this commercial expertise, but have the empathy of a different disability sectors without looking at it as a very niche angle, if that makes sense, like giving us that spectrum of strategies that we need to look at in order to crack this market, which of course have challenges in the funding side, or for us, medical device regulatory approvals. All these are like difficult barriers to entry. But I think it's been great to have the mentors kind of help you guide that process and come up with strategies that work really closely with you, because they had experience with disability, and it's really rare in a lot of accelerators in the startup world. I think I haven't come across any that actually has a disability focus or even have the expertise on board to look at this market. And as Hardeep rightly said, it's the purple pound is massive, and people with disability are willing to improve their lives better, and they want to be able to have access to products just as able-bodied do. So why aren't we kind of tapping into this market and actually facilitate more companies to work and innovate in this sector? So I think it's so great to have the mentors helping us along this journey.
Thanks, Sheana. Zenobia, I can see you're desperate to chime in again.
I just want to just assert again the issue around risk assessment and risk management. Everything is at risk. For us to make a judgment about the probability and the likelihood of that risk being high, medium, or low, that is what we will have to assess, and then give the judgment in terms of, yes, we proceed with this risk management strategy in place, or we proceed with these contingency plans, etc., etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zenobia. Now, I'm conscious that we are literally on time now. We have two other great questions. And I also want to say there is one other question from Jonathan, who is involved with a mixed martial arts for reform and progression business called MMARAP, which is delivering self-defense to deaf and blind and disabled people, ADHD sufferers, amputees, cerebral palsy, and wheelchair users. Jonathan, you've asked if you can ask a question live. Unfortunately, I think the technology is beyond our capability to know how to get you to speak live, but we'd love to engage with you, as we would love to engage with anyone after this webinar with further questions. And we were asked two questions that I want to put to Hardeep just to close out tonight's webinar, to this afternoon's webinar in Europe. And they were, firstly, dealing with the question that was posed, that data from the ONS recently published says that 2 out of 3 people who've died as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic are actually classified disabled people. So how do you feel that the societal changes that are happening as a result of COVID-19 will impact this landscape for disability, Hardeep? And the second question that I'd like you to answer is from Adrian, which is, how can we, the listeners, help? What is it that Kaleidoscope needs and is looking for as a result of this initiative and this webinar? I'm going to leave you, Hardeep, to sort of close us out. Okay. And as said, thank you very much to everyone who's listened in. Thank you very much to John, Zenobia, Sheana, Feargus, and Hardeep, all for giving up your time today. Thank you from me. I'm extremely proud to support Kaleidoscope, and we would be delighted to be in touch. And Hardeep's going to tell you a bit more about the landscape, how it's changing, and particularly about how you can help us and get involved with Kaleidoscope. So thank you from me, and I'll mute myself, and Hardeep, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that. And thank you for the 2 questions. So on COVID-19, I'll answer this as someone that actually suffered with it as well. So know what it feels like to have it for 3 or 4 weeks. I found it extremely challenging. And very sadly, I think most of us have known somebody that has either come close to dying or has actually died of COVID. And I think one of the things our foundation, our charitable foundation, has started to do is set up these sharing circle groups where we're encouraging people with disabilities to start talking and contributing about their experiences of COVID-19 and what they're going through, and actually helping other people that are non-disabled to sort of understand better what they can do. So I think the strength of community of people with disabilities, Rob, I think it's very important to try and bring them together, particularly post-COVID, so they feel that they are unifying and they're helping to support each other. And, you know, with us as Kaleidoscope, if it's that sort of higher balance of number of disabled people that have actually died through COVID, then we want to make sure that we are supporting those that are still alive to make the biggest difference that they possibly can in their lives. So that's critical for us, you know, to create that sense of community, you know, through the foundation, our charitable foundation, but through the entrepreneurship arm and through the recruitment arm. And I think that in terms of what people can do to help us and get involved, to get the message out there that actually people with disabilities should be given fair and equal opportunities. That is the number one thing that is critical to Kaleidoscope and everything we do. You know, do not judge somebody based on the way that they look. Give them the opportunity to prove themselves. You've witnessed 2 entrepreneurs today. We have hundreds of other entrepreneurs that have phenomenal stories, phenomenal products, and deserve to be given a chance. So I think, you know, if people listening out there, give them the opportunity from employers' point of view, recruitment, you know, give people with disabilities the opportunity to prove themselves. You know, the struggle that a lot of them face is actually just getting through interviews in the first place, not even getting an interview. Give them the opportunity and allow them to demonstrate how they can think differently. And I think the most important thing for Kaleidoscope right now in terms of our mission and our vision and our goal about growing globally is we want partners. We want strategic partners on board that will help us to grow. We want more investors from family offices that are looking into, you know, disabled entrepreneurship and the disability community. Yes, they'll make money, but actually it's bigger than that. You know, I don't want them to just be thinking about the money. I want them to be thinking about the social impact. And, you know, the ESG fund that we want to set up as well, you know, the environment, social governance, everything we wanted to do in line with the social development goals for the United Nations. This is all a very powerful purpose, okay? So Kaleidoscope is not just about a business. It is about a movement. It's creating a change. And I would love everybody that's listening to this to do their small part to help us along that journey in whatever way it is, you know, whatever way you come on board, we would love for you to help us. So I just want to close out by saying to my team, who I am the most grateful for. I have a phenomenal team of people behind me, and I would never have got to the point that I am today without that team. And Rob, I thank you very sincerely for moderating today. John, for giving up your time. Zenobia, for being that sort of real guardian for us. You know, with you and your mental health experience, you've been a phenomenal guardian for us. And Feargus, you know, for being that fantastic star example of an entrepreneur. And likewise, Sheana, you know, really what you guys have done is help to make us look good you know, in what we're trying to do. And I'm really grateful for that. And the rest of my team that are listening, thank you very much. There is going to be another webinar that follows. It's going to be a recruitment-based webinar this time, and we're going to be hosting that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So please look out for further details on that. We're going to start to do things a bit more regularly now, and we will, in the meantime, send the recording of this video to those of you that couldn't attend. So thank you very much indeed for being here.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good remainder of the day. Good night.
Night.